I'm going to record. So today we're going to be talking about book 9 of the Republic, and for next week you're going to finish. Well, our next reading is book 10, and then you're all done. And you can tick that classic off your list. And then there are papers, topics due. Let me head on over there. So we are module 9, okay? Module 10, that's Republic book 10. And reading questions are there. And then your paper topics are here for module 11, okay? I believe I went over these last week. Did I go over these last week? Can somebody tell me? Did I? I don't know what I do. Okay, then I will go over these. Okay, so your next paper, same format, 4 to 6 pages in length on one of the following topics. Please write your paper in 12-point Times New Roman font. Oops, due before our class time, I have to adjust the language. This was from a pre-Zoom universe. As with the first papers, I'm going to give you the whole day to get them to me, okay? We will have class that day, but there will be no reading due that day. If you have a topic of your own devising you'd like to write on, just talk to me. I'd like to hear from you about it. I'm totally open to it, but I just like to, I don't like surprises about that. So just talk to me. I urge you to make an appointment with me, a Zoom conference, you know, every evening I'm available, so you can, you know, we can meet up and talk. We can talk about a draft, we can talk about an outline or anything else you'd like. If you have questions about my grading and comments on your first paper, just let me know. Here's the link to the writing studio if you need help, or if you just want the help, because it is a free service. I really urge you to use it. They are working virtually, of course, on Zoom, and I understand they're doing a great job. So international students, please know that there are ESL tutors there as well, okay? Grading criteria are the same as with the last papers. I'm looking for persuasive argumentation. I'm looking for clarity, and I'm looking for correct grammar and insightful comments and critique to take this to the next level. Footnoting. Okay. I want you to be footnoting your quotes now, okay? And this is in preparation for, I'll remind you this next week. And this is in preparation for your research papers at the end of the class, okay? This class is going to culminate in a research project of your own devising, where you will be relating Plato to a topic, or doing further research in him, in which case you'll be using other sources, secondary sources other than Plato in any case. So you need to get practice footnoting in Chicago style for these papers. Chicago style refers to this. It just refers to the order in which the publication info should be laid out. Author, title, translator, city, publisher, year, page number. Okay, so you can dispense with the line numbers for now and just stick to page numbers. Okay, and here are the paper topics. Why are they all number 1? That is so silly. I don't understand certain things clearly, but looks like I need to do a little bit of editing here. In any case, I have come up with 5 different topics for you pertaining to the Republic, and I would like you to write on one of them. And like I said, I am totally open to you coming up with your own. Anybody have any questions? All right. I've also added a footnoting and style sheet with some guidelines about footnoting and about some stylistic remarks, some stylistic pointers. But I'll go over that the next class that we meet together. Okay. Anybody have any questions at this point about the papers? Anybody have any questions? All right. So so this is a weird semester, and on top of all the weirdness, we have a big election next week on Tuesday, and it is of paramount importance that you vote. And if you don't vote, or if you do vote, you must spend time. I would like you to have the opportunity to spend time working the polls or helping out. So we will not be having class next Tuesday. Okay. I'm going to adjust our calendar. We're in module 9. The assignment for module 10 remains the same. I'm just going to move the date back. Okay. And if you've already voted, then just use this as an opportunity to resituate yourself. Okay. Due to crazy scheduling, I don't know, bizarreness, I have an extra week added to this class at the end. So it was easy for me to omit this. But I'm serious. Please do get out there and vote, because it's really, really important. And I don't know if you guys know this, but your age group doesn't have a sterling record in voter turnout, right? So counting on you guys to help turn that around. Micah, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but Micah, they did a consultancy group did a study of Micah voter turnout the last election cycle. Micah is one of the best in the whole country. Micah students vote. So don't let us down. Okay, get on that shit. All right. So I'll make adjustments, and it looks like I have to tinker, edit some more of your final papers there. The next paper topics. Weirdness. Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments about anything about all this business? Scheduling papers, blah, blah. No? Okay. All righty. So let's see here. I'm gonna break us up into little groups, and you guys, I'm gonna break us into breakout rooms so that you guys can chat a little bit. I want you to talk about. I want to talk about the topic of utopia. Last week, we were really coming to the climax of his utopian project here, and I understand has problems with the microphone. But if you do, just contribute in typing, in writing, with your group, that is. Is utopian literature, is that a big thing? I don't really pay attention to my teenagers, so I don't really know what's going on. I mean, is utopian literature big?
I think it's usually the opposite. It's dystopian literature is what we all read as kids.
Like what?
Like The Hunger Games, 1984, Brave New World, Animal Farm, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I would agree with that. You much more often see, like, at least I read dystopian literature, or like, I forget what the name of it was, but there was one that was like, oh, it's a utopia, and then as soon as you get outside of the walls of society, it's like, no, actually, everything's awful, and people are doing really bad, and we need to fix it, kind of deal. So.
Okay. Well, I told you before, I don't really, we do run a class at Micah called Utopia and Dystopia Literature, I believe it's called. I believe it's Mike Sizer teaches it. He's a historian, and he's a really great professor. If you haven't had him, I highly recommend Mike. And I don't really know much about utopian literature. I mean, I've had to read much of it. When I was your age, we read 1984. And I was 13 years old in 1984. We were reading it right that year. I had to read Brave New World. Plato's Republic is the example I know best. And then there is a famous book called Utopia by Thomas More, and he writes it in the 15th. He lives in the 16th century, 1500s. There seemed to have been a little spurt of utopian literature at that point. Francis Bacon, who is one of the founders of the scientific revolution, he writes a book called New Atlantis. I once taught that book and students told me it was the most boring thing they ever read. So I don't really teach that again. But it's interesting. Utopian literature has moments, right? And I told you after Plato writes the Republic, there were several other republics that other Greek philosophers write. They've most all been lost now. Plato's is the best example and the fullest example we have. But it was a moment, right? And then the 15th, 16th century, it was a moment. And the mid 1900s was a moment. Sid?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm in the Utopias class this semester, and it's
You are?
yeah, it's really cool. Like we don't necessarily look at like all fictional utopian works. Like right now we're focusing on like a lot of real world, like present day utopian thinkers, and like people who create communes and like participate in like closed off societies and like self-government. But like at the beginning of the semester, I think it was like week 2 or something, we actually read like chapters 5 and 7 from the Republic. So
Good.
it's like a mixed bag pretty much.
Cool. Yeah, communes, interesting. America has an interesting history of little mini utopian communities, right? In the mid 1800s, you had these people called the Shakers, and I don't know, is that one of the communities you have studied, Sid? The Shakers?
No, I don't know the Shakers.
No. What are their other names? They have a couple communities up in upstate New York. And the Shakers made beautiful furniture. That's how their legacy is known. But they also practiced celibacy. Not very utopian in my view. And they died out. So, but there is an interesting history of utopian communities. Lauren.
It actually, the Shakers came up in the Apocalypse class because like you get a lot of like sort of crossover into utopian and dystopian stuff in like apocalypticism kind of stuff that we're looking at. It's kind of a different topic, but yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Cameron, Earthship, huh? That sounds familiar. I don't know the word biotexture, but I've heard of the Earthship business.
There's like it's like a really, really big plot of land outside of Taos, New Mexico. And they're just these crazy like alien like they're supposed to be like bioactive houses, so they're made completely out of like mud and dirt, and they like are really inclusive to the environment. I've been to it. It's a really cool place.
When I was in college, I remember I think it was in a sociology class, I had to read a book called Ecotopia. I was looking it up the other day. It doesn't seem like the book has aged well, but it was about a guy was imagining if the San Francisco Bay Area seceded and turned into an ecological dictatorship. And well, I wouldn't do that if I were you. If I remember, it wasn't so super. But in any case, this is what I thought maybe we would think hard about utopia for a little while and do this in some groups. So I have a couple questions for you here. Why is it attractive for people to think of utopias? Why are people drawn to this kind of thinking? How do these utopian ideas help? How are they beneficial? Ultimately, how are they harmful? Okay. So I'm going to put you all in breakout rooms here and discuss this for about 10 minutes. Okay. Bye. Have fun. Talk hard. Shoot the shit. Kelly, why are you guys with me? Why aren't you in the breakout room? Izzy? All righty. So I'm wondering why I mentioned utopian literature, contemporary, many of you gave examples of dystopian literature. Does that mean we're in a moment where I can sympathize? Are we in a moment where there's no utopian literature, or why the emphasis on dystopian right now?
I think they're the same thing. I think every utopia is someone else's dystopia, so you can't truly have a perfect society. So all utopian literature is dystopian literature, so I think they're like interchangeable.
It's a nice point. Anna says, because dystopias are meant to be utopian, but the flaws are shown. So dystopias are meant to be utopian.
Yeah, like when you think about like the examples that we're talking about, like the Hunger Games and stuff like that, they're all built by a government that is intending to make them like utopias for some, like utopias for the people that will benefit from it. But the stories are often told from the point of views of the people who suffer. So, like Robert was saying, it's a utopia for the people in power, but it's a dystopia for the citizens.
Oh, neat. So the perspective of those writing about it can determine whether it's utopia or dystopia. Okay. I was a little surprised, I got to be honest with you. My kids were into the Hunger Games business and I watched the movies, and I was pretty fucking disturbed, I got to be honest with you. And I started to worry about my 13-year-old's mental health. What is up with this generation digging on the Hunger Games? Huh? That's a pretty awful story, right? This is a nice tie-in with Plato's commentary on censoring literature. Cameron?
I think that in our generation specifically, there's a really big emphasis on like generational trauma, and there's a lot that like we've had to go through as a generation that has really just like made us have an extreme resentment for like authority and government and all that kind of stuff and shit. I mean, I don't, because Suzanne Collins isn't like our age group, but like I think like that book could exist in any time period and maybe it wouldn't have been so popular, but yet like our generation like really like clung to it because it was like a huge thing. I think a lot of us really internalized it. I know I did.
Yeah. Generational trauma. Okay. Any other thoughts on why the Hunger Games resonated? Or any other dystopian literature at the moment? I guess I don't really know fantasy literature very well, but I guess fantasy literature as a genre tends towards this kind of thinking. Another piece of literature that was pretty popular when I was your age was Clockwork Orange. I don't know if you guys know about Clockwork Orange. And that is very disturbing.
I started reading it and I don't know why I stopped.
Well, I do think that Clockwork Orange is generationally bound. Like, I'm not sure it's the kind of, it's not the kind of story that translates. That would be my feeling. It's very disturbing. I mean, it's awful, really. But it is dystopian, yeah. But we weren't reading that in middle school. That's my point, right? We read that in college, when we were involved with drugs, made more sense. Cameron.
I think it's really funny too now because like obviously like it was a book first, right? But the movie made by Kubrick considered just as much of a classic almost in a different like genre,
Well,
like
the aesthetic. He gave an aesthetic that the book did not imply necessarily.
yeah. And like see, I've only watched the movie because I was told you have to watch the movie.
Mhm.
And it was just I think I got the same message too, but it's really interesting. I think that they're both considered classics in different genres.
And did you feel that translated?
I was pretty horrified and it was painful to watch, but I really loved it.
Oh, okay.
I was very, very deeply disturbed by watching it. And
Why
it
do
was
we put ourselves through this, everybody, huh? Why do we put ourselves through this? If there is trauma, if we are traumatized, why do we need to be traumatized further? My wife would never let me put on Clockwork Orange on a weekend evening. She would kill me. Like, I'm not going to be disturbed, and I mean, like, I don't want to be mentally disturbed. Maybe you all just like being mentally disturbed. Is that what it is? Yeah.
I feel like a lot of it is like things that we can relate to in some way or another, and then seeing like the main characters like overcome those things, and they're like much more extreme than like what you go through. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Would you all come up with this idea? Oh, Cameron, go for it.
I was gonna say that like I watch them now because I don't particularly like being like I don't see inherent value in being like comfortable or like complacent or just like brain dead. Like we would have this debate a lot last year, like freshman year. My friends and I would have like, oh, let's do a movie night. there'd be two people that want to watch a Disney movie, and then like Anna and I wanted to watch like some fucked up thing, because I think there's inherent value in like being deeply disturbed and like traumatized, and I think that is more valuable to I guess like through like in a controlled manner. I'm not saying in every I'm saying like specifically in like movies, and that can give you an insightful perspective and kind of turn the soil a little bit.
Aesthetically disturbed. But why is that good? Why is that appealing? Anybody want to weigh in on that? You kind of gestured towards that, Cameron, but
I mean, like I could say that I don't find honor in ignorance. I don't find.
Yeah, but what does dystopian literature do, though? Is dystopian literature, I mean, if it's a fantasy, how is that not ignorance?
It's not ignorance because it makes you very explicitly challenge the conditions in which you're in. It doesn't it does the opposite of romanticization, rather than it really challenges you to like consider your position and perspective in life, rather than make the best of it, I guess, and feel comfortable with what you have, which is a different that I know we're in a Plato class, so I can't say that, but like you got to be comfortable with what you have, I know, but like I think it makes you challenge the condition that you're in, and I think it's a very valuable thing to like turn the soil. I think it was, who was it, Nietzsche who talked about that, like the plow and like churning the soil, and like if you get left behind, you have to keep churning the soil, and the one who churns the soil is the one who moves forward.
Right. He's the one credited, Nietzsche's the one credited with the saying, whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Didn't that become a Katy Perry song? So tragic. Anyway, Anna, I see your hand there, Lauren. I want to acknowledge Anna's comment here. Looking at our lives right now, this would make a wild dystopian book. I have to agree. Before we dwell on that further, let's hear what Lauren has to say.
I think that there is sort of a flip side to what you were saying, Cameron, though, in the fact that a lot of dystopian literature is often used, like, for instance, 1984 is kind of used as this, oh, look at how lucky you are to be free kind of thing. Oh, make sure that you don't tend towards this, things like that. It's not necessarily a examine your existing conditions. It's like, it can also be used as like something that kind of is the opposite, as in like, oh, I'm so glad it's not me, and then you move on, which isn't very helpful, I don't think.
I would disagree with that. I would say that 1984 is starkly reminiscent of where we are today, especially in England. You can be tried just for a thought crime. And I think that if you would do, like, if someone takes that away from it, then that's from a place of immense privilege.
My point was looking at it from a place of privilege is still something that one can do, and it often does happen when you're not looking at it as you maybe should, but.
Isn't it funny to think about the years, right? So 1984. Now, I remember as a kid when we were told, and it was, I remember when the year 1984 approached, we're all like, oh my God, it's 1984. Is this going to be like Orwell's book? And it wasn't, of course. Not completely, or not wholly, or not yet. I mean, Cameron raises a good point. Like, what exactly for a utopian project or fiction to have predicted the future, what does it have to get right? What does it have to get wrong? Orwell certainly got, it's easy to look and say he got it wrong, but there are a lot of things he got right. Okay. A little bit later than 1984. I just thought of another dystopian movie that I personally adore called Blade Runner. And I don't know if you guys ever watched that. Something is funny here for Lydia. Is that a problem that I like Blade Runner?
No, it's just one of my favorite movies.
I used to make my students watch. I used to show that movie in class. Blade Runner, excuse me. I will type it here in the. It's actually a really interesting movie. Does anybody know when Blade Runner is set? The year?
What is Blade Runner again? I think I might know the movie we're talking about.
Harrison Ford, and he's a Blade Runner, and he has to kill replicants. It's a time in the future when the human beings are making replicants of humans that have a lifespan, a terminal lifespan. Daryl Hannah was one of them.
Wasn't it set?
Okay, I'm
At
thinking a different
2019.
movie then.
Yeah, Cameron, you got it. And it was set in L.A., Los Angeles in 2019. So if I were tech savvy, I'd have the intro here, but you should see Los Angeles in 2019. It's like a hellhole, and it's like dark and rainy, and it's like there's no sun ever, and people are moving to other planets, and boy, they got that shit wrong too. I believe that's Ridley Scott. Not that he meant to get it right, but it's just hilarious sometimes to think about when we think about in the future what we get so wrong. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that thought. I just think that's a funny point. Cameron?
I was gonna say I don't think that they got it totally wrong. Like especially like the aesthetic, like the living in the city. Like I know because I've lived in like a suburb and like a big house, but like man, there are days when you're living in the city and like because I used to live in LA too, or Los Angeles and San Diego. There are days where it feels like that when you're just like stuck and all you look up and you see is concrete and clouds and rain and cops, and especially here in Baltimore. Like every night from my room, I see the fucking police helicopter with their light shining down, and there are people in the streets, and it's raining, it's dark, and I don't think that they got it totally wrong.
Well, I have a cousin who lives in San Francisco, and he sent me the forecast last month, and it said 90 and smoke because of the forest fires. So that sounds a little bit like Blade Runner.
They were comparing pictures from the fires to actual like screen grabs from Blade Runner.
Yeah. Yes, Sunny, it is modeled after Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And it is it's an amazing movie. It's a great movie with a very well-known soundtrack and a good cast. And it's a very philosophically interesting story, of course, which is one of the reasons I used to teach it. But and there was a more recent a sequel, right, with I believe Jared Leto, and I think that one was set in 2049. I don't know, can't remember now.
Ryan Gosling. It was 2049.
Ryan Gosling, sorry, and Ryan Gosling. Okay. Anyway, there we go. So, what do you all think about that? Why the well, so dystopian, why the dystopian literature, a couple of ideas we've been percolating, here, that there is, as Lauren pointed out, there's kind of like a moral in dystopian literature. If we don't turn things around, we will end up here. By the way, I'm going to do a plug for another fantastic, amazing, outrageously awesome dystopian movie called Brazil. If you've not seen Brazil, do yourself a favor. That thing is fucking awesome. That's Terry Gilliam from Monty Python. It's quite old now, Robert De Niro, but that's amazing. And Brazil borrows a lot from, I think, from George Orwell, actually. It's the reason I thought of it. Why the impulse to think of utopian literature? I'm going to put the question this way. What do we have to learn from utopian literature or utopian ideas? Is there any good in them? Cameron?
Our group talked a lot about how it's like it sets a standard for comparison in your existence, and like that one was really easy for us to come to. But we kind of were thinking about how like we are in an absolute bubble here, and like everyone at Micah, for the most part, is very discontent with the way that America's running, and it's easy. Like it was so easy for us to come to the conclusion, like, yeah, this is shit. We should compare it to that. And I was like, well, I mean, I think we should think, right? Like, imagine if we were taking this class at the University of Alabama and there were a bunch of Kappa Sig boys and business majors with us. Mm-hmm. This discussion would be starkly different. So, like, I think it's important that it can, like...
Kind of awesome. I would love it.
I mean, it would probably be more entertaining to them looking like jackasses, but I think it can, like, wake people up to the idea that it's not okay. Like, there was a book that I was reading earlier, And there was a quote from it that says like, you can't realize you're in a prison if you think that you're free. And it's kind of that comparison that it can really like wake people up and like show them that conditions aren't ideal.
Yeah, good. My comment about Alabama, though, is that I like teaching conservative students because they need to be opened. Anyway, it occurs to me that I think I mentioned this when Plato writes the Republic. It's at a really dystopian point in Athenian history, right? They're really underfoot by the Spartans. And, it is interesting to think about where we are right now in this democracy, right? With a president who undermines voting and likes, favors authoritarian leaders. This is chilling. Lauren.
We kind of thought about a similar thing in that, like, truly creating utopias in literature and assuming that they will work is something that happens a lot when people are in a really bad position, and they want a situation where there will be no issues. And it's kind of a dangerous thing because it presents like all these easy answers to something that's way more complex, but it does indicate there is some sort of discontent.
Nice. Anybody else? Dangers in utopian thinking? I'm going to weigh in on that or expand on that point. How are you feeling about Plato's utopia now, where we are? How does it measure up to all these other things we've been talking about? These other products.
I think it's like a pretty good example because this like utopia that he's building that would be so perfect for him or for whoever would not be perfect for the citizens who live in it, like the guardians who are like assigned mates and stuff, or the poets who have to write certain things. Like that would feel much more like a dystopia to them than a utopia. So.
You kind of imply a nice question, Anna. Who would enjoy Plato's utopia? I'm not really getting anything.
Plato.
Just him. We'll see. No one seems to think that the guardians or the artisans are going to particularly enjoy this place. Yeah? Good. Well, there, we need to spend time talking about the third class in this utopia, in this republic, which is what we're going to talk about today. We have talked about the artisans. He spends a good portion talking about the we've talked about the artisans. He spends a good portion talking about the guardians. He spends basically all of books 2, 3, 4, and 5 talking about the guardians. Books 6 and 7 are devoted to the philosophers. We are told that at the end of book 5, just to recap, book 5, we have 2 waves of paradox. The first wave of paradox is that there will be female guardians, that women are equal to men. And it was taken for granted in the ancient Mediterranean that there was not equality between the genders. The ancient Greeks and Romans were very sexist. But as we discussed last week, you kind of would it's doubly surprising that Plato makes this assertion when you think about, what he has to say about essentialism and about, how your nature is your destiny. He's ignoring that, but that suggests that, maybe he's thinking more expansively about the kind of determinants, the kind of natural determinants, right? It's not going to be necessarily physical strength that determines whether you are a guardian. There's other things that will determine it. Any case, we spend a lot of time talking about his crazy ideas for, how the guardians will be propagating and breeding, and this idea of having women and children in common, and the eugenics and the rearing pens. Oh, and the lottery to start off with. How they will prevent incest. I mean, this is crazy. I think it's very worthwhile to pay close attention to those pages in book 5, where he talks about the lottery, eugenics. I mean, the most horrific stuff, right? I think it's really worth thinking hard about these measures, and then thinking really hard about whether they could be pulled off, and what might be the obstacles, what kind of effort would be required to enforce them. Would people put up with them, right? That kind of thing also. And, think about how much detail and description he gives. Because I think it's surprisingly little. Okay. Any case, I've invited you to think more about these things for the second papers. I have a couple prompts about that. So, there's more opportunity for you all to think about this more. And I do think it's really interesting stuff. Then there is, this leads us to, at the end of book 5, they call this the third wave of paradox. And that is that there will be philosopher kings, or the ruling class will be philosophers. This is line 473D. And I asked you guys to write about this last week. Initially, the men say, oh my God, right? This is the worst. This is the worst paradox. Really? It's the worst, right? This is the worst paradox, Socrates. People will kill you. They will attack you when they hear you suggest this. So just keep in mind, this is a worse paradox than that lottery we just heard about. Okay. Why will people be angry at this proposal? That the rulers should be philosophers.
It's because, at least at that time, philosophers were not very well liked. They were, like Socrates, they were very much the get in your face and try and prove you wrong and humiliate you in front of all of your friends and all of the people who look up to you. And they weren't particularly, they weren't very high up on the social stratus in present day Greece. So then it's basically Socrates, who almost everybody already hates, is saying actually, I should be a king. I should be ruling over you guys, and you guys aren't actually good enough to be kings, and only I can do it because I'm the smartest, etc., etc. I have the knowledge that would be, allow me to lead effectively. And he's, sitting here and suggesting that we need to throw babies off of cliffs, etc.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else? Why will the idea of philosopher kings be viewed angrily, maybe violently? Cameron?
I think like at the time, right, there was a very profound distaste for his type, especially when it came to like ruling, right? Like, wouldn't they expect like the strongest man, like the best warrior should rule? Like the very, very strong masculine should lead and have subservience to him. And like this thoughtful man has absolutely no place, right? Leading, like especially in like Sparta, right? Like their rival.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, these rulers in this time and period would have been martial. They would have been martial. They would have been warring rulers because, yeah, I mean, you're constantly threatened. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you kind of nail it there, Cameron. The idea that you have to go toe to toe with Sparta, who do not fuck around, and you will be led into battle with a philosopher, right? This is not a fair fight. But I mean, let's think about how time bound this is. Could there be a philosopher president of America? And should I run? That's basically what I want to know. I see it now. And if so, I'll start my GoFundMe campaign. What do you think? Could there be a philosopher president? I'm getting nothing. You guys have any thoughts on that?
In theory, you could attempt to do it, but I don't know how everyone else would.
Well, would it be likely?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Not with the current political system, how it's divided between just two polar opposites of Democrat and Republican. Like, I don't see how that could fit into either of those categories.
Anybody else? Would there be public anger, or towards a philosopher president or philosopher candidate?
Well, I mean, like the guy with the boot runs like every year and nobody's angry at him really. So I feel like a philosopher could definitely try to run. And like, I don't know, I feel like maybe they could get a little bit far. They could be like, I'm good at speaking and I'm good at making you think. Hee hee. And people would probably be into it, but I don't know, just the way that things are set up right now is like nobody but a Democrat or Republican could get into office, which is not
What are
great.
philosophers supposed to do, according to Plato? What are philosophers supposed to do? What is the mark of a good philosopher? Vermin supreme, yes, indeed. He once emailed me because he wanted to come to Micah and give a talk, and I was like, sorry, dude. I don't think I can do that. Anyway, if you don't know Vermin supreme, there you go. You have some more homework after class. Anyway, what is the mark of a philosopher? Think about it. What have we seen so far? What is the philosopher's platform, if you will? Think about the apology. What is the philosopher's platform? Asking questions, yep. But like about what? What does he want to question? No? Everybody's too busy looking at Vermin Supreme. Human nature, how it operates within systems. Does the philosopher aim to make you feel good about yourself or critical? Oh, Cameron, go ahead.
I was just gonna like ask to like for like an elaboration on like what you mean by like a philosopher as president. Like, do you mean like someone who practices philosophy like full time, like a college professor running for president? Because like I would think that like somewhat, I mean, to some extent, right? Like anyone in the Senate practices their form of philosophy, right? That's what they want to do. It's like it's their political doctrine, it's their political philosophy. That's why they're running, right? and like some are more extreme than others, but we don't have like, I mean, that's like what America is, right? Is like we're not like, well, in some places we're not like a martial law state, right? Like the military doesn't rule.
Good. Yeah, you raised a good point. I mean, that's why I kind of specified like a philosopher as Plato understands, the kind of model that Socrates gives, which is the critical philosopher, right? Who makes you question yourself. You are right that in the 20th century and 21st century, we tend to see philosophers, they call themselves philosophers, they're what I would call ideologues, and they're less interested in questioning as opposed to making assumptions. But yes, I have in mind more like the model, but one thing that philosophers always have in common is that they will, the point of philosophy is for you to question your presumptions and your assumptions and your prejudices, right? Your values, right? Do you really know? Do you really know the best way to live? Do you really know what is real? Are you really sure that you are living the best life you can? Are you sure that's the way to happiness, right? That's the question. Can philosophers campaign like that? Is Donald Trump interested in you questioning your prejudices? No. That man is all about the prejudices, right? In our democracy, we're going to talk about democracy in a little bit because it comes up in the Republic. In our democracy, it's not a good campaign plan to make to tell voters you're wrong, right? You're wrong, and this is what you should do, and this is what you should think. That's right, Anna. You confirm their beliefs. You make them feel good about themselves, right? You're right. I do dislike Latinos. I think we should have a wall, that kind of thing. Cameron.
I was thinking it's interesting too to think about, right? Like if a different brand of philosopher did come into the Senate, it's interesting how like the religious doctrines that our government does follow, like as of 2016, 91% of the Congress is Christian, which I think is really interesting in the way that they rule America. Like they do follow one specific guideline of how to live a good life, And I think that when looking at like a philosopher coming in, right, that would probably upend their religious beliefs to some extent, probably. I mean, fucking Amy Coney Barrett is a complete jackass who thinks that, I mean, you can like, regardless, right? They follow a certain like path towards Christianity, and like, it's the thing that like, that's why Trump had to pretend to be Christian when he ran. He's been an atheist his entire life, but as soon as he started to run, he started to be like, oh yeah, no, I believe in God. And it's because like it's a standard almost to run that you have to follow a certain religious / philosophical doctrine.
Yeah. 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 You don't, yeah. Politicians will tend to praise their supporters' religious belief. And yeah, that's for sure. They don't question it. Yeah. Yeah, good. Well, let's see, listen, it's obvious at this point, Plato is not a fan of democracy, okay? He's actually one of the most famous critics of democracy in history. And I think, I told you last week, I think there's a lot of reason for us to doubt what he has, his insistence on this utopia, right? As you all noted yourselves earlier in the discussion today, the utopias are dystopias by the flip of just turn over the card. So I would be very careful reading Book 5 as Plato, as an endorsement of these measures by Plato, right? I actually think Plato is rather libertarian about human nature. because there's a lot of indications throughout the Republic that he anticipates or understands or believes it would be quite difficult to get people to live in this kind of a system. But I think where we should take him at face value is his concern over democracy, his worry over democracy. Now, listen, he never was privy to seeing, I mean, a mature and modern democracy. Democracy, as the Greeks had in mind, you have to understand, was highly limited. You know, a third of the population of ancient Athens, as with Rome, were slaves. Okay, so only 2/3 were free, and then of that population, only the male landowners voted. So this is a very limited democracy, right? You've probably heard before that Athens is the first democracy, but take that with a grain of salt. So, you know, he never would have imagined what a real democracy would have looked like. But why philosophers? Why should philosophers be the rulers here, everybody? Why should they be in charge of this utopia? What's his reasoning?
Their thinking is aligned with his own.
I'm sorry, Sam, can you say that again?
Their thinking is aligned with his own.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Well, that's still a little general, Sam. I'd like to hear more.
Well, he considers himself to be like the wisest man alive. So other people that think like him, while not as wise as him, would be wiser than the ordinary person.
Good. So we need people with exceptional wisdom to be running the show. Yeah. Appetites mastered, the philosophers, that's right. And Lauren points out they don't necessarily want to rule. Okay. Good. Good. Well, let's move into that. Let's move into book 7. As we do at the very end of book 5, you know, the discussion turns to this idea of this question of what is a philosopher. And at the end of book 5, they tell us two things. He says that the men say that, you know, the philosopher willingly and eagerly learns. That's 475C. And then a very curious quote in 476C. The philosopher can see the beautiful by itself. 476C. I'm going to explain in due time shortly what that means. And then at the very end of book 5, we are told that what really distinguishes the philosopher is that the philosopher has knowledge. Doesn't sound informative, right? However, now we get a strict distinction between knowledge versus opinion. In Greek, episteme versus doxa, he distinguishes. What's the difference between knowledge and opinion, according to Plato? Anybody know? That is true, Cameron. That is totally true, but that doesn't answer the question what he thinks first. So let me deal with that first, and then that's the secondary concern, which you're right about. This is a quintessential philosophical question, right? What is knowledge versus what is opinion? Anybody know what he thinks? It comes at the end of book 5. There's your hint. Let me see if I can find it here. Looks like it's around 480. And 477. Take a look at this exchange on 477A. He knows something. That is the philosopher. He knows something. Something it is or something that is not. Something that is. For how could something that is not be known? Then we have an adequate grasp of this, no matter how many ways we examine what is completely knowable. Jesus Christ, that's hard. Okay, what is completely knowable, and what is no way is in every way unknowable. A most adequate one. Good. Now, if anything is such as to be and also not to be, won't it be intermediate? Because that what purely is, what in no way is. Yes, it's intermediate. Then as knowledge is set over what is, while ignorance is necessarily set over what is not, mustn't we find an intermediate between knowledge and ignorance to be set over what is intermediate between what is and what is not? Is there such thing? Certainly. Do we say that is opinion? Yes. So knowledge is connected to what is. Ignorance is connected to what is not, and opinion is this middle ground between the two. Okay. I'm less interested in opinion right now, and I want us to talk about knowledge. To know, for Plato, is to grasp what is. It is to grasp what has being. Okay? And this and opinion is in some middle ground between what is and what is not. And this his point is illustrated in the allegory of the cave, which is a very famous story here at the end of book 7. So why don't we dive into that right now and talk about this allegory of the cave. I think you read that for last week. And again, they're discussing this as a way of discussing, trying to define what is a philosopher. And in order to explain what is a philosopher and what is a relationship with this philosopher to everybody else, he says, it's like a cave. So how does this allegory go? Can someone set the stage for us, this allegory of the cave?
All right. So there's basically he likens humanity to just a bunch of people who are chained to the floor and have their heads always facing forward, like they're not able to turn their heads at all, and they're looking at this big cave wall. And on this cave wall there are shadows, because behind all of these people that they can't see is there's a big fire, and in front of that fire there's, I guess, more people who are passing like shapes in front of the fire, and then these people are looking at the shadows from these shapes and being like, that's a cow, that's a grass, that's a sun, and saying that like those are the things that they are naming. These shadows are what they are naming. And then Plato's like, what about that? Like, if somebody managed to like get up and look around, they would be very shocked by what they see. And then if somebody dragged them into the sunlight out of the cave, because of course they wouldn't want to go on their own, they'd be like, blinded and they wouldn't be able to see, and then they'd see all these real things and they'd be freaked out. But then when they go back down, they'd be like blinded because their eyes get used to the sunlight. So like the opposite way, and they wouldn't be able to do as good as everybody else, and everybody else would call them crazy, and if they had the ability, would try and kill them.
There you go, Audra. That was amazing. One detail I'd like to hear about, and this is this for anybody. What, when this person escapes and gets outside the cave, what does the person see? For example.
They can't look at the sun or like the daylight for a while, for a long time. They can only actually see during during the night, and they can see stars, and that's the only light they can see. And then gradually they have to kind of adjust their eyes.
Well, I'm going to follow, thank you. I'm going to follow Audra's examples, right? In the cave, they see shadow of a cow and grass, and I forget what else you said, maybe a house, and they're looking at the cave wall and they're saying, look, a cow, a house, grass. And the guy escapes the cave in your story, Audra. What does that guy see now?
The real versions of everything. So like he sees the three-dimensional grass and he can touch it and see how it moves.
He's like, holy shit, now this is a cow. Right? That thing we were talking about down in the cave, that's bullshit, but this is a cow. And then he goes back down in the cave, and Audra reminds us he is not greeted well. Why is he not greeted well? What's he doing? He has just seen a cow, everybody. Huh? What's he gonna do? He's gonna come down and see all his compadres chained up, like ogling at shadow cows, and he's gonna say, dude, I just saw the real thing. This is not it. Cameron?
This part for me almost like reminded me a lot of the apology in a way, as a way of like justifying what happened to Socrates. Like he finds his wisdom, he comes back, tries to tell people, and he's killed for it. And it's exactly the way he describes the person referring to like the cave. So in essence, right, he's comparing the prisoners to like the entirety of the Greek political system.
Good. And he's saying to them, right, what you think is real is not real. I have seen what's real. And Lauren and Robert and Sunny are right. Like, he is disruptive, and he is an outsider, and he's weird, right? And he's like out of place, right? Like, once you've seen reality, how are you going to fit back into the unreal world? The world that he knows is false. The metaphor that's given in the Republic, he says that he goes, when I think there's a very famous paragraph Plato says, when you come up to the light from a dark room, your eyes need adjusting. And similarly, when you go back, and you can't see very well, and it takes time. And similarly, when you go back into the dark, your eyes need to adjust again, and you're going to seem silly, and you might stumble. Right? And you might stub your toe. And Socrates is like that, right? He's a buffoon. He doesn't know how to get on in this cave world. He looks like an idiot, but he is in touch with another world, is the point. By the way, here you go. I have your drawing of the cave right here, everybody. I didn't make this drawing. I just found it online. So here you got your prisoners. Here you have your shadows, people holding them. And there's your flame. And here's your guy getting out, problem is they should have had a real horse up here so the guy gets to see the real thing, right? So what's the point? The people in the cave, they are seeing things that are at first, second, they're seeing shadows of imitations. So they're at a, second remove from reality here, right? Not the most electrifying drawing, but, maybe you can do better. I'm sure you can. So yeah, I mean the cave is a very important way of explaining his understanding of reality and our relation to it. And he sums this up neatly at 517b. I want to call your attention to this passage. This is a big one here, very important. The visible, this whole image block, unless we fitted together what we said before, the visible realm should be likened to the prison dwelling, the visible realm, where we are. And the light of the fire inside it to the power of the sun. And if you interpret the upward journey and the study of things above as the upward journey of the soul to the intelligible realm, you'll grasp what I hope to convey. Since that is what you wanted to hear about, whether it's true or not, only the God knows. But this is how I see it. In the noble realm, the form of the good is the last thing to be seen, and it is reached only with difficulty. Once one has seen it, however, one must conclude that it is the cause of all that is correct and beautiful in anything, that it produces both light and its source in the visible realm, and that in the intelligible realm it controls and provides truth and understanding, so that anyone is to act sensibly in private or public must see it. So reality, there is an essential dualism to reality. Actually, the term that we use in philosophy is metaphysical dualism. On the first day of class, I introduced this term to you, metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of reality. In Greek, meta equals beyond, physis equals nature. So metaphysics is the study of what is beyond nature, what is real. Now, the ancient Greeks had a prejudice that what is changing is not real. And what is eternal and remains the same. So the natural world, which is the world of changing, is not. I'm looking at a tree outside my window. That tree is not. That tree does not have being. It is losing its leaves right now. It is changing. Plato, his essential claim is that the physical world is the world of appearance, not reality. Okay? If anyone is familiar with the Upanishads in Hinduism, it's the same doctrine. Actually, Buddhism as well. The physical world is the world of illusion and change, and reality is somewhere else. Audra mentions the matrix up above. You guys is that still a thing for you all? The matrix, that kind of captures. It was written by two guys who studied philosophy, by the way. The matrix that captures it as well. There's a world of illusion, which seems real, right? That's the whole point. But we are duped into thinking it's real when it is not. Now, reality for Plato is the world of the forms. Sometimes also called the ideas with a capital I. Okay, I'm just going to explain it to you, and it's weird, and you may not like it. Not my problem. That's Plato's problem. Plato believed Plato's claim is that the physical world is not real, but there is an ideal realm that is. And there are forms, singular forms, perfect forms of these things. And there are physical instantiations of them that are poor replicas, imperfect replicas that try to share in these forms. Example. The best example I can give, I think this is the most useful. Well, let me break down to you. What are some of these forms? Justice is a form. That should be a capital F, by the way, sorry. What that means is there is an ideal of justice that inhabits this non-physical realm of the forms. And you will have physical instantiations and manifestations of justice, small j, in this world, and they will always be imperfect. He has told us at the end of book 5 that beauty is also a form. This is weird. This means that there is a form of ideal and perfect beauty, and then all beautiful things in the universe, a beautiful song, a beautiful painting, a beautiful person, a beautiful flower, they are an imperfect and fleeting exemplar of that form, and they borrow from it. Okay? I like to also give the example of, he gives this example, I believe in book 10, and I think it works very well to help, because the realm of the forms is very important for Plato, but it's a little tricky. And just to explain how tricky it is, no sooner had he explained it than philosophers immediately had trouble with it. And I won't get into trouble because I don't want to confuse you all further. But to explain the theory of the forms, he also tells a story about a carpenter making a table. Okay. So a carpenter, when a carpenter makes a table, she has in mind the form of the table. And you know what the form of the table is? It is the most fucking perfect table. It is exactly 90-degree angles, not 91, not 89.7 degrees, 90-degree angles. Or maybe, better yet, he wants to make a circular table. That's going to be hard to do because you will never make the perfect circle, right? I mean, here's what I need to explain to you, right? If you make a perfect circle, you know, I have a wooden table downstairs in my dining room, in my kitchen. And maybe it was perfect for 1 second after it was built. But here's the reason that the Greeks were prejudiced against physical nature. Because physical nature, contrary to what we may believe or think, is constantly changing. How is it changing? I'll tell you how it's changing. I'm looking here at Lydia. Okay, I see a picture of Lydia. That's not the same person I was looking at an hour ago. Lydia has changed. I don't know if you guys noticed this. She has 3 fewer electrons underneath her left eye. See? You didn't notice that. And, you know, chemistry, modern chemistry and physics they tell us that the physical world is constantly changing before our eyes, right? Biologists will tell us that we are constantly shedding cells. A physical table looks to be the same to me. It is not. It is slowly degrading before my eyes. I just can't see it. I bought a perfect table of Crate and Barrel. I come down the next morning, son of a bitch. It lost 3 cells over in the corner. Right? How did that happen? I wasn't paying attention. It just kind of happened. You can't fight it. So the point, sure. The point, actually, isn't it? Is it entropy? Yeah, it's entropy. So the point is, like, the physical world is changing before our eyes, but we don't pay attention, or we can't see it, or we can't perceive it. That's just the way it is. Okay, so back to my idea of the carpenter. So the carpenter, he has an ideal, he has a form of a table in mind that he's going to manufacture these other tables against, and he will never, ever, ever create the ideal. He will never achieve that perfection. But in creating these lesser physical manifestations of the table, he will always draw on the form in trying to make it. So what's the point? The point is that the philosopher has access to reality, and everybody else does not. Only the philosopher knows what is. Everybody else is caught up in the matrix, or is caught up in the shadow games, and they think that the shadows are real. I'm going to start winding down in a little bit here, but let me pause and see if anybody has any questions. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay. You may need to sit on this for a little bit, digest it. It is, it's important, and but it is a little tricky. The big picture, if it is at all confusing, I want you to hang on a couple points. The big picture idea is that the physical world is not real. This is the world of appearance and illusion. There is an ideal realm that is real, and the philosopher has access to them. Now, approaching the end of book 7, he says, he says, okay, so this has been a story explaining the nature of philosophers, right? This is what distinguishes philosophers, really. And these are the ones who rule. How do they feel about ruling? The philosophers, that is. Do they want it? Do they want to rule this shit show down here?
They don't really want to leave, like, the sort of, I think it was sort of explained as like a higher plane almost, but they are required to because they need to go and help their fellow prisoners at the bottom.
Good. Somebody else was going to say something? No? Good. No, they don't want to rule. They don't want to rule. Because they're like, why would we want to rule this shadow game that you're all invested in when we know this is not real? To which Socrates says, this is exactly the reason they must rule. So you get it? Why must the philosophers rule? Well, yes, there is this business of their knowledge and their wisdom. But there's this other point. They must rule because they don't want to rule. You get it? The philosophers must be kings because they don't want to be kings. Why is that important?
So they have no like motivation and objective. And they have like they're devoid of like outside influence, I guess. They have no, I guess like no motive.
Okay. Great. Anybody else? It was a little general what Cameron said. Can I hear some more specifics? Yeah. Robert kind of sharpened what you were saying there, Cameron, right? They're the perfect ones to rule because they can't be corrupted, because they don't give a shit. Or at least in this realm here, right? Now, that's kind of a interesting argument, to say the least, right? Really? They're the right ones to rule because they don't want to rule? Okay. Two comments. There have been plenty of philosophers who come after this saying, like, I'm not so sure that's a great qualification. Aristotle, for example, thought that was a problem. Here's the other point. Guess who's happy in the Republic now? No one. Right? Nobody's happy. The artisans are miserable, the guardians are miserable, and the philosophers don't want to rule. Okay. No one's happy. Any questions or comments? All right. So there you have it. That's a very important distinction. It's going to be very important also when we turn to book 10. I'm going to take 5 minutes and just wade into book 9 because I feel like I need to make some headway. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, everybody. In order to really wade into book 9, we need to talk 1 second about book 8. And I'm going to post here in the chat a summary of book 8. Okay, you can get this from the, there's a summary in the edition I had you all order. Book 8 is about, they talk now about the decline of the ideal city. And this is a political discussion where they talk about the likely decline, what would come after. And Plato says that, when there are 4 types of political constitution after the Callipolis. The Callipolis is the ideal city, Kalon Polis, the beautiful city. And the Callipolis is defined as rule by the philosophers or rule by people ruled by reason. Ruled by people ruled by the rational part of the soul. Then you have timocracy, which is the second type. First. That's the first decline. Timos is honor. So it's ruled by people who are ruled by the spirited part of the soul, i.e. warriors. Here you have a real martial state. Oligarchy, ruled by the few. He defines it as ruled by people ruled by necessary desires. Necessary desires. Democracy. Demos is the people. Also in Greek, it had a negative connotation. It means like the rabble. Democracy is ruled by people ruled by unnecessary desires. And then tyranny, ruled by people ruled by the tyrannical part of the soul. A little redundant, I know, but we're going to see what that is. Let's see here. Necessary desires. What is that? And what are unnecessary desires? Who wants to have at it? Tell me, what's a necessary desire? What's an unnecessary desire? Necessary desire. Come on now. That's easy. You're probably
Food and
feeling.
water.
I'm sorry, Kelly.
Food and water.
Food and water. Hunger, thirst, sex. You got it. Cold, heat. You're too warm, you're too cold. Unnecessary desires.
Alcohol.
Yeah.
Sauces, glazes.
Sauces. You're funny.
Woman. Or I should say like intercourse. Which is it's like kind of necessary, but not entirely necessary.
Yeah, it's a debatable one. Good. Big picture, there are distinctions between necessary desires and unnecessary desires. We open book 9 with a further distinction between, how does he put it? Let me make sure I get this right. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to make sure I get this right. Oh, here we go. Yes. Unnecessary lawful desires and unnecessary lawless desires. What's this business about lawful and lawless? Oh God, I sent these both to Michael. Jesus, how'd that happen? I meant to send them to everybody. Unnecessary lawful desires and unnecessary lawless desires. What's this business about lawful and lawless? And he gives an example of one here early on in book 9. What example does he give to illustrate the difference between lawful desires and lawless desires? Anybody know? Lawful and lawless? Lauren?
Lawless would be more like without any regard for consequences, like murder or something like that.
Okay. What example does he give? When do the lawless desires show up, everybody?
When you sleep.
Yeah, in sleep. Sonny's right, in your sleep. The horrible dreams, right? Eating everything with restraint. Fucking everything without restraint, right? I mean, just like, oh, this is the the id, the Freud's id that is, run rampant. Why is he telling us this? This is the tyrannical soul. This is the nature of the tyrant. This is the nature of the tyrant. The tyrant is the person who is given over to and dominated by lawless desires. And what is that person like? How else does he go on to describe? I'm going to go on for about 3 more minutes, everybody. How does he go on to describe the tyrant? What else? What does he have to tell us about the tyrant, about this tyrannical person? What's this tyrannical person like? What's this tyrannical person's life like? Audra's right. Fucking your mom. Sorry. Nailed it.
He, and this might be a little bit later, but because I was kind of confused what he was talking about with the upbringing, but I'll get to that in a second. But he was saying like they are willing to do anything to fulfill their desires, which are unfulfillable, like by their very nature. So they will steal from and attack their parents. They will steal from the people around them. They will steal from the city. They will take over and attempt to like subjugate everybody else in order to satisfy their own needs. They have no friends. They're very lonely individuals that kind of don't. They are nothing but a detriment to society.
Yeah, he says that the tyrant has no friends and no freedom. And this is line 579E. Why does the tyrant have no friends and no freedom?
Well, he has no freedom because he's like, no matter how many people he subjugates or becomes the master of, he is always a slave to his own desire, or a slave to passion, as they say. What was the other question?
Why does this tyrant have no friends?
Oh, because he is an asshole and like cannot view anyone as an equal to him, and then nobody wants to hang out with him. And also it's either like, I think I said in my response, he either sees somebody as better than him and he's trying to get rid of them, or he sees somebody as worse than him and he's trying to take stuff from them.
Good. Nice. Lauren.
Also, like, there's something about he's either looking for people to obey him or he's looking to get something out of them. So there's no real honesty and interaction with any other human being.
Awesome. Love it. It's great. So the tyrant, this is a very similar point to what we saw at the end of the Gorgias, or somewhere in the Gorgias. I think it's his conversation with Callicles. They're fundamental disagreement about desire, right? Plato's point here is that, in a way, it is the absolute human dream to be the tyrant, to have everything at your disposal. That seems like the ideal. By contrast, he says that's actually misery. It is the life of a slave. And it's the life of a slave because you are enslaved to your basest desires. And your base desires are insatiable. The point is, so here's what's interesting about the tyrant. The tyrant is not a tyrant. The tyrant is a slave to a tyrant. The tyrant is a slave to desire, which is tyrannical. Desire never lets up. So what's the point? The point is the tyrant is miserable, and he's partway answered Glaucon's original question. I have 1 minute. I'm gonna tie us together now for 1 minute. Plato says, Glaucon said at the beginning, back at the end of book 2, he says, well, we want you to define justice, but we also want you to prove that justice is worthwhile in itself. And we want you to prove that injustice is the opposite, that injustice does not pay, but injustice is not good for the soul. And here he has proven at least that latter part. You may think the unjust life is happy. It is not. It is the most pathetic, miserable life. It is not the life of freedom and power. It's the life of misery. Okay. Justice, by the way, is fulfilling. Why? I'm going to run through this argument very briefly here. Line 580D, he says, the just life is the happiest because the just soul is where the parts of the soul are in harmony. Reason, spirited part, desire. The desires part does not run the show. The desires part is not a tyrant. The just life is the happy life because that person gets to partake in all things in moderation. The three goods of human life: money, honor, knowledge. It's line 580D. 580, the letter D. Money, honor, and knowledge. Besides, the just life is the most happiest because, unlike the tyrant, the just soul has access to things and takes enjoyment in things that do not diminish or disappear. Okay? The reason that desire is so painful is because the things that we enjoy quickly go away, right? We have a piece of cake, we love it, it's great, and then it's gone. And maybe you would like, I want to hit that high again, and you're like, I'll have 3 more pieces of cake, and then you're pain after. And then 3 hours later, you're like, I need some cake again. You're like an addict. You're like shooting up on cake, right? You just need it full over and over and over and over. The beauty of the just soul is that reason has access to the things that are, and the things that are do not deplete or diminish. Okay, I'm going to end with this passage at line 586a. This is my favorite passage in the book, where he's describing the difference between, these different types of good that the just and the unjust soul take part in. He says, therefore, those who have no reason, 586a, therefore, those who have no experience of reason or virtue, but are always occupied with feasts and the like, are brought down and then back up to the middle, as it seems, and wander in this way through their lives, never reaching beyond this to what is truly higher up, never looking up at it or being brought up to it. And so they aren't filled with that which really is, and never taste any stable or pure pleasure. Indeed, they always look down at the ground like cattle. These are the people who are enamored by desire. And with their heads bent over the dinner table, they feed, fatten, and fornicate. To outdo others in these things, they kick and they butt them with iron horns and hooves, killing each other because their desires are insatiable. For the part of their soul that they're trying to fill is like a vessel full of holes, and neither it nor the things they are trying to fill it with are among the things that are. Socrates, you've described the life of the majority. Most people live a life of trying to fulfill their desires. They believe that that is happiness, but they're trying to fill an insatiable part of their soul with things that are fleeting. So it's doubly tragic. It's doubly doomed. The philosopher's life, the just soul, that is the life of happiness, because then you will enjoy and take part in things that endure and that are eternal and immortal and unchanging. Okay? All right. Well, there you have it. I'm sorry I went a little bit over, but I know you're off next. I'm giving you off next week. So there's my excuse. But I also wanted to make sure we really got to the end of book 9. Okay. And we'll pick it up there again in 2 weeks. Okay. So I will see you now in 2 weeks. Your next reading assignment is not next week, but the week after. And then the week after that, your papers will be due. So everything is going to be bumped down, and I will a week. And now I'm going to be adjusting your schedules accordingly. Okay. All right. So make good use of next week. If you haven't voted, then vote. If you can't vote, then work for it or pray. Either one. It's all good. It's all useful. All right. Have a great week, everybody. Peace. Okay. I'll stick around if anybody wants to talk. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
ya.
everybody.
Bye.
Lovely.